Good. Okay, so we're going to have a bit of a discussion now before we have the food a bit later on. We have got a Slido which Matt's going to be running here. So I'm going to ask Julie, who has suggested she'd like to say a few words. If we've got a microphone, please, for Julie Robinson. Who and from Roy Thorne's, and obviously as far as lawyers go, there are other brands available in the room, of course. Yeah. So microphone to Julie, please. So thank you very much, Julie. And then just to remind you, including Julie, that you came second last time, I think.
I did come second. I lost by a whisker last time.
Last time,
yeah.
A bottle of wine, yes.
Yep.
So remember, comments or questions voted by yourselves, okay, for the bottle of wine behind me here. Over to you, Julie, please.
So Gary asked me to respond to Peter. I think probably hoping that I was going to either pour cold water on or challenge or tell Peter he was wrong in some way. But Peter and I have discussed this afternoon a couple of times over the last couple of weeks, and I see that he's absorbed most of the points that we covered in our conversations. So there's not much to disagree with. The only point, two points really. One, Peter, I can't, I admire you. There are a few people I admire more in farming. But the personal is not the collective. And you chose broilers, and that was probably a fortuitous choice, brave, risky, fortuitous. I just wonder if we need to, Minette's report was more or less about asks from government, but it is true that as a collective, we have things to ask of government. That doesn't mean that just because one farmer is doing well and farming profitably and trying to make the farm energy secure, that everybody is in the position to do that, to invest at that level. And so that's one point I would make, really, is that, one story doesn't mean the industry is all in a good place. The second point I would make is about SFI, and we did have this spat a little bit last year. And the thing that worries me about SFI at the moment is that it's being framed as support from the government for the farming sector, and it was never meant to be like that. When Michael Gove first, the point was, sell your produce and then sell your environmental goods, because there are environmental goods that the market doesn't provide and that the government wants provided. And unfortunately, the discourse has now been framed with limits, with over prescriptions, with fairness. I could see it from the Secretary of State last week. And it really worries me, even on the Farmers Weekly podcast, Hugh and the good folks on that podcast talk about farm support now and the details around farm support, that it's not supposed to be farm support. It's supposed to be another almost market mechanism, the government buying what the market won't provide. It does worry me that we will end up still being viewed as a subsidised sector if we're not careful.
Peter, would you like to? If you want to say.
So the reason I started with my story about Tony Blair getting things wrong is Julie used to look after me when I was at the NFU. So I didn't know the answers. I have lots of people helping me, and Julie was one of them. And when we went out to debate intensive farming with the WI, the WI conference in Liverpool. There's about 4,500 women, and I don't want to be anything controversial about this, but there were 4,500 scary women at the WI conference. And Julie took me for a preparation for this debate to a WI meeting in Cambridge. And there was I sat there with the WI in Cambridge listening to this debate where they had a collection of disused bras for Africa. I've never been so embarrassed and felt so awkward in all my life. But Julie helped me write the speech, and actually we turned the motion over, I seem to remember, on that day. So my point is, when you do things like the NFU, why I started with a caveat at the beginning, you have people who are able to keep an eye on you and what you say. The reason I do think, and I use the example, you know the person I'm referring to about the beef suckler herd, you know, that was somebody who started on a county council farm in Cambridgeshire, ended up owning their farm, doing beef suckler cows, they do contracting. Even the lady who got voted out, Rachel Hallos, who was the outgoing vice president of the NFU, you know, a small hill farm, not a lot of arable or also a lot of agricultural income, but her kids are contracting, they're doing work for local water board. There's all sorts of things going on. They're not sitting back and waiting for someone to come and help them out. So I do think, you know, the mindset of, you know, am I going to stay at home and hope someone's going to come up with a solution? I think that's gone. I do think, and particularly where we sit in around here in England, there are an opportunity to do other things where we possibly can. So yes, I get your point that I was lucky and all the rest of it. I flippantly say, in all my time of doing NFU stuff, as I went around, the one sector that occurred to me that was actually doing quite well almost all along the years was the broiler sector. They had been ability to invest, they were able to tackle into renewable energy. There was a whole load of stuff they could do. So, you know, it was probably through observation that's why we ended up. Your last point about SFI and the change from being a government incentive to manage the environment. I think some of the rates have driven us, and some of the failure of break crops to be economically viable for us have driven us into how can we, I'm making sure Susie's not writing this down, almost abuse the SFI to help us make our farms profitable. And I was talking to David Ross beforehand about the unharvested cereals. I think there's some serious disincentives in there. And I think there's a conflict between, on one hand, saying we're farmers, we're important food security, and then we immediately take 25% out to put into unharvested cereals because it's £1,072 a hectare. I think that's a margin of about 900 quid a hectare. I can't do that in any other form on my farm. So there are some things out there that are perverse. I think they're going to come back. Now, where you talk about being paid for environment, that's where I think Digby stuff comes in. What I don't know is how easy it is to manage it. I've already mentioned the fact that I think carbon in soil is really difficult. I know that, you know, I'm also involved loosely at Rothamsted. You know, when I talk to those guys about the reliability of carbon measurement in soils, it's probably too much to say it's hit and miss, but it's variable and very weather dependent as well. So getting a big source of income from storing carbon, I think, is quite risky, but I do think the market's up there. I think the retailers want to know. They're paying me more now for my chickens for having fewer birds in a shed. They're backing their commitment to the public, their customers, with money. So I do think, and I hope I'm not over-egging it, I do think the market's out there wanting to engage with us, and that's why I think the Farmers Organisation is a real benefit to us.
Okay, that was a pun, over-egging it.
Over-egging it. Broilers are different.
Yeah, okay, okay, I do know, sorry. Digby.
Can I come on the soil carbon bit?
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
one thing, because we've been thinking about this a lot over the years. So we split the soil carbon stuff. Firstly, you've got the carbon footprint, and then you've got soil carbon. So from a carbon footprint perspective, we put everything down into emissions, and then sequestration above ground and sequestration below ground. And so emissions-wise, it's about looking at reducing emissions and finding income streams to do that, which is always going to come from the supply chain, really, exactly as you say. And you know, there's different methods out there that are looking at that. So there's Soil Association Exchange, for example. People have probably seen, you know, they've got an interesting model about different companies paying in to reduce your emissions. But then on carbon in the ground, in the soils, and then in the vegetation, at the moment, there's not much measured stuff out there. So the carbon calculators aren't very good in terms of what's actually physically measured. So you have the Woodland Carbon Code, which provides the woodland carbon market, and the government have funded it, so everyone thinks it's great, essentially, from the market side. And then you've got a few people trying to measure the above-ground carbon, so the vegetation in the hedges, in your grass and stuff like that. And then you've got soil carbon. And I think our advice is really, these soil carbon programs are interesting, exactly as you say, to get control of your soil carbon data and then be able to manage that as part of your wider carbon footprint. So intensively measure your soil, understand what's in there, and then look at getting value either from the supply chain or by selling as an offset, depending on how you're managing your whole carbon footprint altogether.
Thanks, Digby. Okay, good. So, can we have some more? Yeah. So we've got a question here. Thank you.
Just one for Digby, really. Is the carbon an agreed metric that everybody buying or selling is working to the same metric? Now, that's the case with B&G, but up until the last time I looked, there was no standardised metric for assessing the carbon.
Yeah, no, exactly. So with the voluntary markets, you'd never have one individual provider. So because biodiversity net gain is legislative, it's in legislation, essentially DEFRA have created their own metric to put out there. Whereas in these voluntary markets, generally you get several providers all providing a methodology. The key thing is about their alignment to international frameworks and standards. So from a carbon emissions side, most of the carbon footprints all align to international carbon emission standards from ISO. And so they're mainly giving you different numbers because of the sequestration amounts rather than the emissions amounts. From the soil carbon side, similarly, there's international frameworks. So you have the ICVCM, which is one of them, which provides sort of internationally recognized standards. And so those measurement programs need to align to those international standards to be essentially recognized as a legitimate product.
Got that, David? Mr. Whitlock. We got Mr. Whitlock here, sorry. Okay, fine, after that. Okay.
Thanks very much indeed. A question really to Peter, I suppose. The majority of people in this room were probably being associated more with the combinable crops sector. And over the last 50 years, which is probably as much as anybody's been in the industry as an adult in the room, maybe a few a bit more, we've had things like intervention, area aid payments, import tariffs, export subsidies, all to protect the combinable crops sector. We've also got the privilege, because you can put dry storable grain in the shed. You can say, I don't have to sell it today. I can leave it for 6 months, 10 months. Even some people have carried it over. So we've lived in a world in the combinable crop sector significantly different from a man that's producing cabbages, chickens, or milk. We are now living in that global trading market, and I hear far too often now from players in the combinable crop sector, particularly those with a social media presence, sadly, some of the trade association representatives as well, who are telling us, my customer is not treating me fairly. And what we're not doing then is making ourselves very appealing to our customers. If all you do is turn around and beat him up and saying, you're being bad to me, and I hear this too often about the retailing and processing sector, which has been a fantastic opportunity for the UK. Why are we not going out there and creating opportunities to say, what can I deliver for my customer? I was at a meeting last week, and a large, very large biscuit processor supplier is now looking for suppliers who will work with them on the environment, on carbon, but also on assurance and managing price and engagement with the market. Mr. Farmer, you need customers like everybody else, and I please ask the farming industry, treat their customer as a respected person in the supply chain.
Thanks, Richard. So are you saying that we should be using cam grain as an example?
No, I'm not associated with cam grain any longer. No, what I'm asking is, and hopefully Peter will and Digby will support this, look at customers as somebody who is your ally, not as your
as
enemy.
individual farms, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Got it. Peter, do you want to?
I can't believe you haven't got a social media presence, Richard. You'd have well, you ought to have a blog. You ought to be. You answer the question yourself, really. You know exactly what we. When I say think differently, when I say we've got to change how we do stuff, you know, I'm going to give you an example with the arable farming. And please, I'm sure you're going to tell my brother Richard. He's away on holiday at the moment, but I'm going to land him in it. You know, we load chickens up 24 hours a day. Right? When they want to come and pick the birds up, they're catching birds at 2 in the morning, 4 in the morning, 6 in the morning, even on Sunday afternoons, not Saturdays. That's because we're paid, we work in partnership, and that's what they do. Brother Richard says to me, they want to come for a bloody load of wheat at 5 o'clock this afternoon. I think the mindset's going to have to change. You know, we're going to be saying, if you want to get your mill full in the morning, we either have to invest in hoppers that can load themselves or whatever, but if we're going to make the supply chain really efficient, if you think of lorries stuck on the M25 because it's really busy, do we load lorries at 2 in the morning through a hopper system or something? That's the sort of partnership I think we're going to have to think about if we're going to make the supply chain more efficient. We certainly want to get close to our customers. That's what I do in the poultry world.
Thanks. Did you want to say anything about that, Digby? Not really. Okay, so we have got a question in the back. Yeah.
I think this sort of leads on from what's been said, but it's a simple question. Can farmers collaborate?
But Digby, probably you, Digby. This is,
Yeah, I don't, maybe Julie as well, but I think it's about the structures and how, I'm not going to be good at answering this, but it's how, essentially, the structures in place to how you cooperate. There's so many examples, though. I think everyone does it informally in many ways, you know, informal partnerships, cooperatives, machinery sharing, machinery rings as well. There's loads and loads of examples of how it happens, but I think there's different models springing up about how people do it differently. I think from our perspective on how I think our model works is that we essentially, the farmers retain 100% control of their land and what they do with it and decision making, and then trade through the cooperative. And I think that model works because it's a very, very thin layer rather than being too involved. But other people will have.
Okay, so Julie, do you think that we as English farmers or British farmers are very bad at collaborating compared to Europe and New Zealand, for example?
So what interested me when the Environmental Farmers Group was set up, I thought, fine, you know, there's a bit of grant funding here to fund the startup costs and the setup costs, but I honestly couldn't imagine anyone joining it. You know, there are now, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of hectares of land being committed to it. And that has really, that really surprised me.
Sure.
So I stand corrected, actually, on that one. It's difficult, impossible for me to say, really. I can just say that I think it's a bit of a myth that farmers in England, Wales, don't collaborate, but that's partly because I work with so many cooperative groups and
You
put them together.
specialise, yeah, absolutely, yeah, sure. Yeah.
The other bit I think we have to recognise is the speed at which the £80 an acre have disappeared. You know, this in effect's been our New Zealand moment. And I do think that means we are going to think differently. So we are going to think about how we partner up to take advantage of environmental schemes. You know, I mentioned Arla and Peter Tuberg talking about how much they were paying out in dividends to the dairy farmers. That's a farming cooperative. So it does happen, it is happening, and I think probably in the arable world we're going to have to think harder about how we take some of that cost out of the system, because we've just lost £80 an acre almost overnight.
Thank you. So we've got a question at the back, please.
No, it's not a question, it's actually a comment on the farm collaboration. Okay. So, I'm sorry, I come from Norfolk, and I've crept in here today, but we have a farm cluster that's got 85 farmer members. And we cover, I think, 65,000 hectares. And the way that works, it's very, very different to Digby's. It's not a particularly business-focused organisation. What we tend to be is project-led. So if an opportunity comes up that some of those 85 farmers want to get involved in, we get them in the room like this, we get an expert in, they go off and we create a sort of a working group, and we take advantage in that way. And in that respect, we've done things such as bringing livestock onto some farmers' lands with graziers, connecting with them. We've got 21 farmers collaborating in a continuous hedgerow. So my dad was a farmer. He would never have collaborated with his neighbours, but I would say that today's generation, very, very much so. So, yeah, I think collaboration is something that farmers are thinking very differently about.
And I spoke about machinery syndicates, you know, so we have a few of those, but there's a room for many more machinery syndicates, I believe. So we've got a question at the very back. Thank you.
Hello. So I'm fortunate enough to have been to a few different conferences within the industry recently, and there is this theme that always crops up where people say we're in a period of great change, but also of great optimism and great opportunity. And I just can't help but feel that that's entirely misplaced. If you take a long view of the history of farming, you had the Corn Laws and then you didn't, and there was a really profound depression that lasted pretty well from the 1870s through to the Second World War, and then we supported, and now we're being dumped again. In a sense, the New Zealand moment, as has just been said. But there are different narratives about what happened in New Zealand. Some people say, oh, it was great, you know, we don't actually need subsidies, we're making loads of money. But most people lost their jobs. And I come from a very small farm at home. We can't compete with Cranswick. And people in the community that I come from are going to really struggle to meet the challenges that lie ahead. I'm sure people like Cranswick will do very well. There are people who think, well, we don't have to ask government for things. But this is foregoing all of the reasons that farming has been supported since the war and the reason that we still exist as a social class. There are social benefits to food production, all these things. And we're not talking about those because we're accepting what's been laid in front of us. And I feel that the optimism is commendable, the ambition is commendable, but it just feels slightly naive, because if we are to accept that it's a dog-eat-dog world, we've got to fend for ourselves, well, there are bigger dogs than us on the global market. I just don't see that even the big boys can survive, but I suppose it remains to be seen.
Thank you. Do you want to respond, Peter, to that?
Look, I have days where I feel exactly the same. You know, I do have days where I look at, I can't see who answered the question. Where did the question come from? Look, I can convince myself that the trade deals done by Liz Truss and Boris Johnson were bloody scary, and, you know, I look at the rise of imports of beef and lamb and you extrapolate those up and you think, where the hell's that end? Okay, I do get that. The reason I show the slides about both the global instability and madness is going around the world, but also climate change, I do think that makes it different. Now, whether there's partnerships to help with investment, whether there's people, you know, bluntly, to build pigs or poultry sheds, they're almost funded. You can almost get a contract where, so if you can get the planning to do one of those schemes, the funding will come available in a partnership. So it is available. But I can have those dark moments of thinking, and Julie did a chart when we celebrated the 100 years of the NFU, doing 100 laws for 100 years. So I'm well versed in what happened with the Corn Laws, what happened with the Great Betrayal in, I think, 1932, was it, Julia, just before? You know, all the bits where we've had people abandon farming support. But actually, the reason I deliberately show, you know, the government debt of 3 trillion is I really don't think government's going to come and bail us out. We've got to think about how we do this ourselves and how we partner up with people rather than holding the bowl out. And that's tough, I know, but I don't think we've got any other choice. The other one, I think we have to be very careful about how we're perceived. When I had the phone call to say our barn was on fire last Tuesday, I was having a row with Ollie Harrison, who decided that he'd won the day for inheritance tax relief because he'd had kids carrying wreaths down Whitehall, saying how we're all going to be killed because, or commit suicide or whatever it is, our future's ruined. We need to be careful about how we portray ourselves in this climate, particularly when you've got the challenges of Ukraine, the health service, defence, etc., etc. So I would like, you know, to be a positive story, and although I have those dark worries as well, I think there is a mindset change within retailers and processors who want to partner us.
Thank you, Peter. So, any other comments or questions? Sam? Oh, you've got the microphone already.
Yeah,
Good.
I've got the microphone.
Well done.
Peter, I don't disagree with your thoughts for the day. Where I would raise a challenge, and you mentioned the NHS in passing. Everything I read about the NHS, the cost of funding of it is considered to be unsustainable going forward. Yet the 3 biggest killers today are entirely lifestyle related: heart disease, diabetes, and various forms of cancer. Most of those are actually related to either what we eat or, to some extent, what we drink, and the amount or the lack of exercise that we take. And what I think I've found very interesting recently is that, and it possibly comes in You'll Think Differently, that The two most interesting products on the market at the moment are actually Manjaro and Ozempic, which are all about eating less or losing weight. And so we're actually overproducing food in this country, if you think about it. I'll just leave that for you as a floater.
I don't think we are. We had a city food lecture last week where Professor Susan Jebb spoke, and she showed how the impact, I think they're saying now between 2 million, and I heard someone from John Lewis say it's 2.5 million, people are now on these weight loss drugs. And they're about to become in tablet form. So there's hope for me yet, maybe, who knows. But the point you made was that actually food consumption drops off by 26%, but then it levels off at about 16%. You know, so some calorie drop, but bearing in mind we're 65% self-sufficient, and we are going to have alternative uses, Digby's going to be incredibly successful, etc. I still think there is strong demand for UK food, and I wouldn't abandon that. And my last shot, when you say think differently, look at your brother. What a brilliant business he's built. You know, from quite a modest acreage to start with, he's got a fantastic farm shop that people go from all over Bedford to visit, don't they? So we can do it.
And a cafe.
And a cafe. Well done. Thanks, Sam. So Will Young, is that right?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I'm not sure I'm going to add a lot, but I think 3 points I would like to make. One is, 26 years ago, I did my dissertation on collaboration, and I actually read some of it the other day, and it's probably more relevant now than it was then. And I think my own view as a farmer and as a land agent is that collaboration is often overlooked in the respect that everyone looks at the reasons why they shouldn't do it and the constraints and the things they might not like, but they overlook the benefits, and some of the benefits are those that aren't measurable in terms of your well-being, generating new ideas, coming up with things you would never have thought of if you'd never collaborated. And some businesses have done incredibly well because they've taken a risk and they've been prepared to change, even if there was reasons for them not to do it. The other thing I believe quite strongly is in the arable sector is we are generally, most businesses, fixed costs are far too high. We're over-kitted and we're reluctant to collaborate, and I think that is stopping us reducing cost. And thirdly, I think some businesses have to ask themselves, what is their ambition, risk, and are they a business or are they trying to create a lifestyle? Because often when you see people, there is a big question for me, is this a business or is it a legacy and a lifestyle? Now, there's nothing wrong with any of those, but you can't necessarily run a profitable business if you are trying to generate a lifestyle or protect something which is not progressive enough to create partnerships with other entities. And whatever you choose to do in life is your choice. It's right, but there will have to be a sacrifice of one for the other. And if you need to make money to pay for your lifestyle to generate income, you can't necessarily have everything you want that goes with that. And there's no right or wrong, but I think some farming businesses are stuck between the two and they don't know which way to go. And there is no right or wrong answer, but it's trying to work out which way. And subsidy support, I think, in general, has probably stagnated progression in some ways because it's propped those businesses up.
BPS, that's, yeah.
And, you know, that's probably why we are in such a challenging period now.
Thanks, Will. Did anybody want to? So one of the most enjoyable meetings I have around the country are with, I mentioned machinery syndicates earlier on, the rugby balls up there. I used to be Welsh, but I'm no longer Welsh when it's listening to the Six Nations now. And we're probably no longer English either, are we? So, yeah, so, but the most enjoyable meetings I have are machinery syndicate AGMs, which is what you're saying. And the buzz in those groups when you have 3, 4, 5, 6 farmers in that room collaborating, have the scrutiny of costs, or the scrutiny on the cost of the machinery, which you can't in a single business quite often. The same scrutiny you have on machinery that you have on variable costs. And it's just a real good buzz and well-being. Thanks for saying that word, because I think that is so important in our industry at the moment. And so machinery syndicates really and tick that box. So I think there's a lot more collaboration that can be done. And the arable margins at the moment, Peter, will drive that, I think. And I'm not a big fan of contract farming. As I've discussed with Peter over the last couple of years, the contract farming model, in my opinion, doesn't work anymore with the current margins, because it's not sharing costs. But if you all collaborate with machinery, it is actually sharing costs. So, sorry, that's my opinion. Any other comments or questions? Remember, there's the bottle of wine. Thomas, we've got... you're going to have a go at the bottle of wine, Tom?
No, not at all. Mine's probably an observation from a dinosaur, because I'm fiercely independent. I've got a land agent sitting either side of me. I think there's a simple fundamental problem facing UK agriculture at the minute, and I'm going to go to the cereal sector. There are too many people trying to earn a pound out of a ton of wheat, and I'm not talking about the guy sitting on the tractor on the farm. Look at all the staff in DEFRA, look at all the experts that we now have to employ, look at our fire extinguishers checking, our farm assurance and everything else. That was never there before the war, the last war. Now there are too many people trying to earn a living out of agriculture, and it just isn't there.
Okay, good point. Anybody want to? Peter, did you want to answer to that or not? Sorry, making you work, Peter. Yeah.
I think you are a dinosaur. Look, you know, whether it's, you know, the red tractor stuff, and I'm not a big advocate of it. Why did it start? You know, BSE, customer assurance of what's going on, how we're producing our food and all the rest of it. You know, we have people crawl around the poultry farm unannounced. Boy, does that concentrate the mind. You know, it's not rushing around filling bits of paper in because you've got a farm assurance for an arable farm, which we know goes on. It's pretty light touch. And actually, having had a fire last Tuesday, bloody glad we have fire extinguisher inspections as well. So look, progress does mean you have some regulation, some scrutiny, but what it should do is mean we have access to markets. And that's what I think is important. And look, as we're sitting here with all these advisors around us as well, Tom, the one thing that came out in New Zealand was, I understand that 86% of all the farm advisors lost their jobs and the farmers carried on as normal.
Well done, brilliant. Yes, we've got a question here. That's a very good point. Yeah, brilliant.
There are a number of points I wanted to make on Peter Kendall's talk, and I'll just pick one randomly. I do feel that all this optimism is actually quite dangerous, not for the agricultural sector necessarily, but the country as a whole, because we need to remind the government how precarious our food security is. And in spite of what farmers may do well, may prosper in the future, they may become more efficient, more likely there'll be a diversifying, and we've had one talk about that kind of diversification already. But I'm thinking for the future, they may make a decent sum, and it may be that in those figures you get, that was another question I wanted to ask, in your figures you gave on farm income, how much of that is really from producing food? And I'm afraid that the truth is that food production in this country is going to reduce, whether it be due to the effects of Brexit or climate change or a number of other factors that are affecting us.
Thank you for that. Good point.
Look, I think food security is a really big issue, and I absolutely buy into that. What I don't think is government support is the answer to resolving it. So I think, you know, government, if we're going to talk seriously about food security, I'll give you a few examples. Horticulture, particularly where they're going to focus on. Try and get planning for a reservoir, almost impossible. You can go and buy a brand new combine from Germany and get 100% write-off in year one, reservoir 33 years. The policy to help us invest in farming has never been thought about. It's been, we give you a subsidy check and they abandon it. So there's so much, I think, whether it's planning. I spent 2 years trying to get planning to put a wind turbine up to make my farm, make the poultry farm off-grid as much as possible. There's a lot government can do. My pitch, I suppose, is I don't think saying to government it's all doom and gloom equals them taking food security seriously. You know, what we think we need to do is, so actually, we're up for a partnership with government where we can, through investment, through the right strategic policy from government, make sure we can invest and we can do things differently on farms. Your figures, you question the total income from farming. You know, for fear of being repetitive, you know, beef and sheep have had a belting run. Their prices are sky high, record high. Milk was 50p a litre. What happens when milk's 50p a litre? Farmers keep more cows and they give them more grub and they produce too much milk. We've seen a supply response. So those figures do reflect what's been going on. I think eggs production is absolutely, I can't even remember the numbers, but eggs are very profitable at this moment in time. Pigs had a better run. You know, again, at the Eldon Estate, onions and potatoes in harvest 24 was phenomenal. So those figures do reflect an industry. I forget the arable, parking the arable bit, because I know we've had 2 ghastly autumns and all the rest of it before last year, but those figures do reflect income from farming having gone up. My pitch to government is to say, actually, we're up for the challenge. We want to be partners with you in doing this. And it won't be about subsidy. It'll be about enabling policy to help us invest and hopefully be more confident. I don't think telling them we're all going to hell in a handcart is going to get their checkbook out.
Thanks, Peter. So I think it's probably time, Matt, for us to have... Does anybody else want to make a... Paul, sorry.
I'll have a go.
Paul,
I'm not questioning what Peter said. I actually completely agree with him. I enjoyed the chap at the back's well-worded summary of where he thought he was as a small farmer. He was very well eloquently put. I have about 70 staff, about 30-odd farm managers to look after. The number one thing I have to do is maintain their motivation and their positivity, because if you don't have that, you've failed from the start. And I've diversified a lot of businesses, small ones, bigger ones, and you can make it work. You've mentioned 2 ex-NFU presidents tonight, and we've heard from one, but we didn't mention Tom. Tom said an interesting thing, Tom Bradshaw. He said in his trip of Australia, he noticed the farmers there all refer to themselves as business people, compared to many, and I'm sure some in this room do, I am one, but many who refer themselves as farmers in the UK. It is a mindset change. It really is. And actually, it's there for the taking, because there's a massive skills gap in this country at the moment. And the good news is we are absolutely set up to fill it. And it's a great opportunity, and I'm seeing lots of growth. So I share Peter's enthusiasm, and I understand this point at the back. That is in all of us. They're the dark moments. But we haven't got to live in the dark. We've got to live in the light, and we've got to go forward.
Thank you very much, Paul. So I was thinking about, unless somebody's got any other comments or question you want to make. So we're going to have a couple of questions for you in the audience now that Matt is taking control of. So I think, what do they need to do? Scan the QR codes on your phone, please. So we've got 2. We will there. I'll zoom into that one. Scan. There's every other seat has got a QR code on. So once you've done that, please, is this quite easy, Matt, isn't it? Yeah. So once we'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. Okay. And then can you all think about who's going to win this bottle of wine? Okay. Sorry? So who's going to win this bottle of wine? So has everybody done that? Hand over to you, Matt, now to I think we've got 2 questions, have we? Oh, right, okay. So this is my boring one. Do you have a robust succession plan as per the Farmers Weekly? So yes, not yet working on it, or no. Okay, I think you can do that on your phone. Is that right? You do that on your phone and it will come up on the screen. Well, can everybody do that who's actually doing this? And then you can show it live now. Okay. Yeah, so Matt's going to actually put it up there. Yes, not yet, or no, okay? Yay. So, not yet working on it, 46, 43, and no 11% of this audience. Do you have a robust succession plan? Lisa, yeah? Yeah, okay. Kevin, can we have the mic? We've got Lisa Millington here who is one of our, another brand of lawyer.
That's great news, that 46% in this room. What do you think that figure would have looked like 3 years ago, Gary?
3 years ago, yeah, very good point. It would have been huge, a lot less. And I understand that. Do you want to carry on and make the point?
Yeah. So I think I don't want to labour the point about inheritance tax because I think we're all about sick of it, really. But I think I am an optimist, and if anything, it has awoken the industry up to this issue.
Absolutely.
And farmers and farming families that didn't have that robust succession planning in place have,
yeah,
through those pressures that you had on your diagram of feeding into that, your dysfunctional family have brought people to the table. So I think that's great. And I think if you're in that 46%, that's great. If you're in that 43%, that's the next best thing. If you're in the 11%, that troubles me slightly. But what the other point I just did want to make earlier with regard to the pie chart is if you're in the yes category today, you need to keep dipping back into that working on it category every few years as well, because for me, this isn't a single one-off exercise.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think once you've got your robust succession plan in place, I really liked your risk assessment, your risk register tool, Gary. And I think it's worth stress testing your succession plan against that risk register as things come along. So that was, I didn't want to interrupt the good discussion that was going on in relation to Peter's stuff, but that was something I did want to pick up on. That seemed a good point to do it.
Very good point, yeah. And I 100% agree, and I'm sure the 2 or 3 or 4 lawyers in the room will, and us as well, have done a lot of work since that October 24 budget in terms of partnership agreements, in terms of wills, in terms of thinking, in terms of discussion, etc. So it's pushed a lot of people up into that 46%. Yeah, good. And you all agree, I'm sure, that it's been good for the industry, you know, and you know that hasn't been said in public a lot, because it's hit the industry hard. I think it's probably because it was so easy before. Would that be right? You know, it has been very, very easy before. You just didn't do anything, and we just panned things over, and it's been so easy. Okay, so that is interesting. Can we clock that, please, Matt? Okay, and so we've got another question now, which is, do you have the same confidence in our industry as Peter Kendall? I did warn Peter about this, actually. So we've had bits of points about this. So do you have you got the same confidence in our industry as Peter Kendall has put forward today? This is a simple yes and no answer. So can you please press your buttons now, as they say? Okay, so you're pressing your buttons. So any predictions? Any predictions on this?
Looking at the age profile, Gary.
Okay, yeah, the age. What, dinosaurs? Yeah, I'm probably one of them. Okay, Matt, press the button, please. Whee, okay, 59%, 60% have got the same confidence in the industry, Peter Kendall, but 41% no, interestingly. Yeah. Yeah, that's quite interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Okay.
You're in an hour area, Gary.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Are you happy with that result, Peter?
Delighted with it. What wasn't so correct, I was the other way around.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would have thought it was the other way around, actually. Yeah, I would have thought it was the other way around. So I'm pleasantly surprised.
Do it again with just farmers answering.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, well, I think it's the majority of farmers in here. I have mentioned lawyers a few times, so we've got a couple of bank managers as well, but the rest of you are farmers, actually, so it is. Yeah, so that's really good. So you probably won the argument, Peter, in terms of influenced people. So that's really good. So can I now ask, please, who has won the bottle of wine, and then we will start winding up, move the chairs, and then the food will be at the back fairly shortly. So can I have any proposals, please, for who has won this bottle of red wine? Otherwise, it's mine. Yeah. Any proposals? You, Susie, you didn't ask a question. No. Oh. Oh, sorry. Chap at the back. The small yes, okay. The small farmer at the back. Any other proposals? The point you made about going back to the corn laws, and then forward. Yeah. Are we all agreed? Yay! Come on down. No, Ollie Fletcher. Well done.
Yes, thank you.
Well done, Ollie. So all that is left for me to say that the food will be here at 5:30, which is in about 10 minutes, I believe. So I'd just like to thank both our speakers. We made you work quite hard, as well as, but hopefully it's been fun. Okay, so, and thank everybody else, because it's been a collaborative, working farmers working together. So it's been a collaborative, everybody's had a go. And I hope you've enjoyed this year's conference. We'll probably do something similar again next year. So can we have a thank you for these two gentlemen here, please, who are working hard. Good, thank you all very much. So there will be food at the back, will there, shortly? No, that's what I had, so I don't know. So yeah, we've got a lot of hungry people here. So yeah, so in another 10 minutes or so, the food will be at the back. Okay, so, and we have got drinks at the back as well. So thank you all very much.